Hello, New Testament students or prospective New Testament students. In this video, we're going to talk about the different options for the optional New Testament textbooks for the Introduction to the New Testament class. So the required textbook that everyone will acquire and we will be all reading from together, what I will call the shared textbook, is Toward Decentering the New Testament by Mitzi J. Smith and Young-Suk Kim. And this textbook is explicitly interested in decentering sort of the traditional or the historical modes of doing New Testament scholarship. In their introduction, they state why they write this text and why they title it Decentering the New Testament. And they write that it's necessary that minoritized scholars, so both of the authors are minoritized scholars, produce authoritative texts too, not as the authoritative or legitimate voice, but as one among other introductory texts. This text, Toward Decentering the New Testament, a reintroduction, is a step in the direction of creating an introductory text that focuses on and prioritizes diverse and non-white readers and contemporary issues that affect real flesh and blood minoritized readers and our brothers and sisters as allies. So by assigning this book, we are sort of prioritizing these minoritized voices. But with the optional New Testament textbooks, you're also going to get sort of the more classical way of writing a New Testament textbook. And the reason is for that is so that you can have a sort of compare and contrast between what Smith and Kim do and what a more traditional textbook does. So when you put things into contrast, it's easier to see what each one is doing, and it works better for your learning. That when things are maybe opposed to one another or are put differently, you can see both sides a little bit more clearly. So the reason for the optional textbook is to get that contrast, but also to bring in more voices to our course community, and so that you sort of have autonomy in engaging a different textbook that you are sort of the representative for in the class, that you are going to be bringing another textbook's voice or perspective to the forums or to the in-person classes, depending on which version of the class you are in. So sort of a twofold purpose for having these optional New Testament textbooks. One is to put them into conversation with the required text or the shared text for this class, and the other is to bring in even more voices. So these are optional in the sense of not that you can or cannot buy them, but they're optional insofar as you have the option to choose one or more of them. So you have options from what you're choosing from. And what we're going to do is go through the different options very briefly here, so I can just give you sort of an overview of what each one is like so that you can make an informed decision of which option you would like to choose to engage throughout the course of this coming semester. So the first option is, and these are in alphabetical order as listed on the syllabus, is Paul Achtemeier, Joel Green's, and Marianne Thompson's Introducing the New Testament, Its Literature and Theology. I would call this a sort of moderate to centrist New Testament textbook. That is to say, it's not too conservatively oriented, it's not too liberally oriented, it's sort of right in the middle. It brings in some issues of contemporary theology, but not as often as other textbooks in this slideshow will. It's also a little bit dated. You'll see it's from 2001. So in terms of scholarship, that's starting to get a little bit older. They're probably in the works for an updated version sooner rather than later. Michael Byrd and N.T. Wright's The New Testament in Its World is a newer, a more recent publication that is fairly evangelically oriented. Both N.T. Wright and Mike Byrd are sort of large names or loud voices in the evangelical world. The layout of this text is one of its great virtues. It has a sort of really interesting layout, it has color images, and it brings in sort of a lot of modernizations, and it has a fairly conversational tone. It's a very, very large textbook, very, very thick, so lots and lots of information in this one. The next one is David A. De Silva's An Introduction to the New Testament. The second edition, if you are to go with this textbook, I would encourage you to get the second edition of this one. There is a first edition, but it's fairly dated, and it's not nearly, the formatting is not nearly as good as in the second edition. The second edition does contain color images and graphics, which for me, I think is a great virtue in a textbook. I really like to have images in these texts. So like the last one, Mike Byrd and N.T. Wright's textbook, this one's evangelically oriented. Typically, when you see something published by InterVarsity Press, you can rest assured that it's probably evangelically oriented. It's also sort of historical critical in its outlook. That is, it brings in a heavy dose of history, but it also is oriented toward ministry context, that it will bring in issues of ministry, and depending on your own sort of denominational location, some of the issues of ministry that are brought in are, because it is evangelically oriented, might be sort of a little different than the ways that you are thinking about ministry in, for example, a PCUSA context. The next one here is Bart Ehrman's classic textbook. So this is sort of the classic historical textbook for New Testament studies. As is well known, Bart Ehrman is used to be a Christian and is no longer a Christian, and is very sort of explicit about that in his public persona as well as in his scholarship. That being the case, this is sort of not theologically oriented, not a non-theologically oriented text. It is fairly explicitly a historically oriented text. Bart Ehrman is a fantastic historian and a really, really great teacher and communicator as well, and that shines in this textbook. But if you're looking for something that is a bit more theologically oriented, this is probably not the one for you. Then Dale B. Martin's New Testament History and Literature. This one is, I would say, sort of highfalutin scholarship, but also written in a very, very accessible way. So if you're looking for something that sort of has more of a scholarly flair to it, this is would be a good option for you. It is also, like Ehrman's textbook, much more historically oriented. I would characterize this one and Ehrman's as probably the two most historically oriented textbooks in the list. And one of the virtues of this is that it has a different organization of its content than many other textbooks do. Many other textbooks will sort of just march through the order, the canonical order of the New Testament. Martin organizes the way he moves through the content of the New Testament in a different kind of way. So if you're sort of a contrarian, this might be the textbook for you. Then we have Fame Perkins Reading the New Testament, an introduction. This is written by a female author. As you probably have noticed as we've been going through this list, most New Testament textbook authors are white males, which is why one reason I think this textbook, our required textbook, is so great, because it is not written by white males. So Fame Perkins is a female, so this is a female authored textbook. It's quite dated. So the second edition is from 2012, but the first edition and the second edition isn't a major update from the first edition. Was written in the 80s. So in some ways, this one's a bit more dated, and it is very historical critical in its outlook as well. Sort of non-theological, sort of in the vein of the Dale Martin and the Bart Ehrman textbooks that we've already talked about. Mark Allen Powell's Introducing the New Testament. This, to put my cards on the table, before this textbook was published, this was the primary textbook for my Introduction to the New Testament classes. What I really love about this textbook is that it is artistically oriented. There is a ton of art, of Christian art in the textbook, and it's really globally oriented as well, especially in the art. That is to say, the art comes in from not just North American artists, but from artists across the globe and across time as well. This is a recently updated edition. If you go with this textbook, I would encourage you to get the second edition. Again, this one is sort of moderate in its outlook, not too liberal, not too conservative. It deals with some issues of theology and some issues of history, but doesn't necessarily privilege one or the other. And then our last book on the list here is another classic New Testament textbook, Anatomy of the New Testament, and it's a 7th edition here. The 7th edition has color images. Some of the previous editions do not. So this, like Bart Ehrman's textbook, sort of has the virtue of standing the test of time, that it's gone through many editions. It's been used by countless New Testament professors and students throughout the past few decades. And so because it's in many editions, you can get a previous edition for fairly cheap. The updated edition has color images, as I've said. So I would, if I were purchasing it, I would go for the updated edition. This one also is a bit moderate, and it's moderate or centrist in its outlook. Historically critically oriented, with some theology coming in, but not sort of too heavy-handed one way or the other. And the last thing to note is that any of these texts that have multiple editions, I'm okay with you purchasing a previous edition. I would suggest buying the most recent edition, but especially if you want to acquire more than one of these textbooks, you're going to be able to find them a whole lot cheaper if you get previous editions. So especially the case with Anatomy of the New Testament and Bart Ehrman's textbook, if you get a previous edition, you'll be able to find it for fairly cheap. So good luck making a choice. Oh, last thing. You can choose any other New Testament textbook as well, so long as you get my approval. If you find something that you think looks eminently interesting and you think would work for the purposes of the course, I would love to hear it. Shoot me an email and just make sure that I approve it for the purposes of the course, just to make sure that it sort of works for what we will be doing. But I want you to even be able to go beyond the options that I have given you here. So now I will say good luck in making your choice.